My name is Lars Peter Nissen. I'm the director of ACAPS. I began working in El Salvador in 1989 as a volunteer. Originally, I thought I would spend my career in Latin America working with democratization. But through coincidences, I got involved in humanitarian aid, and I have actually spent most of my professional career in the humanitarian sector. I worked with ICRC, with the Federation of Red Cross, Red Crescent, a number of NGOs, and lately ACAPS. I think it was coincidence that I started out in the humanitarian sector, but I think what made me stay here was that the work I had done in Latin America was very much about creating political spaces or enabling people to express their preferences clearer or giving more choices to people. And I then came to work in the humanitarian sector where I saw situations where the people we serve weren't empowered in the same way. For good reasons, in very difficult circumstances in Angola or in other places. And at the same time, you had a lot of the thinking in the sector evolving around Mary Anderson, do no harm, a lot of thinking around how do we get better quality into the humanitarian, how do we become more accountable to the people we serve. And that attracted me. And I think starting from that perspective, how do we treat the people we work with as people, essentially? How do we give voice and make ourselves accountable to the people we serve? That, I think, has driven me from the beginning. For me, making sense out of a situation, out of a crisis, is where it all begins. If we want to base our interventions on needs, as it says in the code of conduct that most of us sign up to, then you need to know what those needs are. And that's not a simple thing to do. So for me, assessments, it's really about decision making. It's really about deciding which geographical areas, which population groups, and which sectors are the most important, and where do we get most value for money. What characterizes the humanitarian sector is that we will never have enough resources. Per definition, we operate in situations where resources are scarce. And therefore the decisions we make around who gets what are essential. And the assessments is what helps inform those decisions. It's the very basis, or should be the basis, of those decisions. And that's why I believe, I'm quite passionate around assessments and the role they play, because it's about ensuring that we hear the voice of the people who are affected by disaster, and that's what we base our actions on. So if you look at the situations we work in, they're often characterized by three things. Firstly, they're very dynamic. Things change all the time. Secondly, there are a lot of information gaps. There are a lot of things we don't know. You could call them known unknowns, maybe. And thirdly, there's a great pressure to make decisions. So in other words, we don't know what's going on. We know there's a lot of stuff we haven't even seen yet, and we have to do something now. That's a very challenging situation to make sense out of. And so I think one of the biggest challenges we have is that when people say assessment, they immediately think about sitting in a Land Cruiser driving out to the affected village and talking to the population. But really, it's about analysis. It's not about collecting data. Of course you have to collect data. Of course you have to go to the field. But what we have learned is that you have to begin with a systematic review of, first of all, what do you need to know? What is actually your information requirements? Secondly, what do I already know? What was known about this area before the event? And then thirdly, you need to go out and ground truth your initial understanding of the situation through interviews with the population. But very often we do the other way around. We go to the field first, collect a lot of data, we come back, and then we don't really know what to do with it. There's a lot of things that pulls us in a different direction. Firstly, the way the sector is put together is with a lot of specialized agencies. And obviously, as a popular saying goes, to a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Or in other words, if your job is to work with water and sanitation, if you go out and assess, the chances that you will pick up that this is a water and sanitation crisis. Same with food, same with protection. Now, I want to emphasize that that's not necessarily wrong. That's why we have sector experts. Their job is to have a deep understanding of this sector and to in a sense, advocate on behalf of that interest. The challenge comes when you have to prioritize across sectors. That can become very difficult. One, because we don't have a standard methodology really for working cross-sectorally. If you look at the food sector, there are very strong methodologies for collecting and analyzing data there. Same with health and so on. Other sectors are less strong. But where do you put it together? How do you, in a sense, tell a story about a disaster? How do you construct a narrative that we can share, which gives us the answer to where are the most critical needs in terms of geography, in terms of population groups, and in terms of sectors? In terms of coordination, I think it's very important to understand the difference between making sense out of a crisis and responding to a crisis. Once we respond to a crisis, we want to make sure that we have the most efficient allocation of resources so we don't duplicate and waste critical resources. When you make sense out of a crisis, it's sometimes a good idea to have several opinions on the table. If you tie the sense-making process too tightly together, you run the risk of groupthink. So actually, you don't want to coordinate too strongly on the sense-making side of things. You may want to have different opinions on the table. And then the key, I think, is to have the different analytical capabilities in the sector work together and network those capabilities so that we, through a triangulation process, come up with the best possible results. But it's very naive to think that we can, if you have a too mechanical sort of perception of what assessment is, you will go wrong. Right? It's not a cookbook sort of a process. Sense-making is exploring, it's understanding things that we don't know yet. The best example recently for me is Ebola. What kind of a crisis is Ebola? Is it public health? Is it a security crisis for the whole world? Is it a cultural crisis? Is it a humanitarian crisis? It's probably all of the above. But, how do you make sense out of that? How do you get that one right? How do you tell the right story about Ebola so that we choose the right solution? If you try to do a very mechanical approach to that, I'm afraid we'll get it wrong. When we talk about the future and assessment, a lot of people initially jump to the perfect machine that can scrape all of the knowledge from the internet and tell us the truth about what has happened in a situation. That's not my dream. My dream is that we strengthen the sector with a cadre of humanitarian analysts. If you think about it, there are actually very few analysts in the sector. And we need to have that as a profession which is as widespread as information management or public health. It's essential that we have people who think, analyze, and do decision-making support. So that's the first thing, that we have that group of people in the sector. Secondly, that they're networked, that they have a community of practice that enables them to share information so we get the best possible analysis out. And thirdly, I think it's that we begin to understand that assessment is really, it's decision-making support. It's not the decision. Right? There are a number of different factors that influence where you land on a given issue, and needs is one of them. But if we could begin to understand the decision-making process, and also that we need more than one opinion on the table to get a good, robust decision-making culture, then I think we're beginning to crack it.